So today we're going to take a look at this. This is the Bachmann Deluxe Spencer with moving eyes. This is Bachmann's interpretation of the A4 Spencer from the Thomas and Friends television show. Most of us are familiar with the Hornby version of Spencer, which was a railroad A4 with the relevant paintwork and lining and things like that, with a face placed on the smoke box to give their interpretation of Spencer from the television show. So today we're going to have a look at Bachmann's interpretation of Spencer. So this is the Bachmann Deluxe Spencer with moving eyes. We're going to have a look at the packaging, we're going to have a look at the model itself, and I'm actually going to put it up against a silver A4 from Hornby, not the Spencer, but just an older A4, just to give us some comparison with the actual sizes and things like that, the way in which it's actually moulded and its shape. Let's have a look at the packaging. It is in a sort of vacuum formed bubble packaging, which is actually quite sharp at the edges. I cut myself quite a few times just handling this when we first got it. The packaging can be reused to keep hold of the locomotive and keep it reasonably safe. As you can see here, this has already been opened. It's not like when you get a locomotive from the Backman main range or from Hornby or other suppliers like EFE, all of the others. It is just a vacuum form packaging. You can see it's meant to be hung up on a shop hanger along with all of the other particular models that are available in the range. This is actually an American import. We've had this for a number of years now, and this was a means to an end in relation to Aidan actually getting a Spencer for his collection. So let's just have a look at the back. On the back you can see a selection of the available items that were available from Backman in the US when we purchased this. So you've got Thomas, Percy, James, Edward, Gordon the Express engine, Henry the Green engine, Toby the Tram, Emily, obviously this Spencer, and then there's some more engines here, one of which you just can't get a hold of these days, which is Salty. So you've got Mavis, Diesel, Salty, Bill, Ben, Douglas and Donald. Like I say, Salty now, don't even think it's in production anymore, which is a shame because it did look like a lovely model and it was available as a set. So over here on the left hand side you can see it says Spencer's eyes move from side to side, which is pretty much something that happens across all of the models available in this range. When we first got this item, I actually got it for Aidan because it was a means to an end, because trying to get a hold of Hornby Spencers was just ridiculous, and even now they're going for silly money. And as I said before, they are just a railroad A4. One of the things that seriously concerned me when I purchased this item comes down here at the bottom. There's actually a couple of things on it, but you had your usual safety information on it, you know, what it's based on, things like that, and it said this product meets or exceeds all US federal safety standards. Some US states require additional information as follows. Now this is where the concern came in. Warning, contains lead, may be harmful if eaten or chewed. Well, why anyone would be eating or chewing it, I don't know. That it may generate dust containing lead, keep out of reach of children. So there we go. Although to a lot of people they would say this is a toy, it's meant to be kept out of reach of children. Here's the real biggie for me. It said, warning, this product contains a chemical known to the state of California to cause cancer, birth defects, or other reproductive harm. So you can imagine alarm bells were going off when I actually purchased this, until I actually read into a lot of models, and there's a lot of chemicals and things inside of models that have very similar traits. So it's just the fact that it was actually printed on here that really set alarm bells off. Anyway, this model is now about 10 years old. You can see by the copyright on here of 2011. There's the box or the packaging, and there's the scary bit out of the way on the packaging. Getting inside really isn't as hard as it could be, and you can, like I say, reuse this packaging. What I actually did was I ran a Stanley knife from here all the way along, or craft knife you could, all the way around the outside and stopped it there, leaving this part intact, which enables you to do this, and you can just lift that part out and you can reuse it again every time. So all of the Backman models that we've got, or Backman US, Backman Thomas and Friends range, they've all been opened that way so that we can reuse the packaging. So it still sits inside this piece of packaging. It's not a shiny model, it's got a bit of a satin finish to it. It's more of an off grey blue colour. It's strange, it's not quite that silver look that you would imagine Spencer to be, especially from images, if you've seen the programme or posters or postcards, all that kind of thing. It has sort of like an off bluey grey colour to it. So let's take it out. So as I do this, I'm just going to bring into shot here. We have got much older Hornby Railways A4. This is a Ringfield motor tender drive, and I'm going to bring it in every so often just so that you can put some comparisons against the two. One of the big things I'm going to point out right now is, from what I can make out and what I assume, and I think I'm pretty much correct on this model is based on the CGI series. So it's not based on the Britt-Allcroft model series. At least I hope it's not, because if it is, it's massively wrong in comparison. And on the Tender, we have got our 8 wheels on 4 axles. They've got a certain amount of play from left to right or side to side to help them negotiate corners, things like that. We've got a mid-sized D-shaped coupling tension hook, and the tension hook itself is actually spring-loaded. You can see there, helping it do its job. As I said before, it's sort of an off blue grey more than anything else. It's got some nice black line in there. It's not particularly straight, but it's there. Pretty much everything on this is just molded. Dummy imitation hook, which when I say hook, it is just a hook. It's very much of the CGI era. It looks nothing like the hook that you'd see on the back of a locomotive. I think that's separately fitted, but pretty much everything else here is just molded. So any handrails there, they're just molded and then picked out with paint. Coal load, weirdly enough, isn't actually that bad. It's reasonably okay. In relation to how you'd fill the Tender with water, there's just sort of a hole, really. It doesn't go all the way through, but there's just a hole, just to give the impression. There's an almost complete lack of any detail within the actual Tender cab area. If we have a look at the rear, we've got something that would resemble a corridor for the corridor Tender attachment. It's not particularly well detailed, it's just there. The buffers are huge. They are plastic molded and they've been painted out in silver. There's a little bit of detail there just to give it a very gloss finish on the chassis, but there's a little bit of detail there to give the impression of axle boxes and springs running along and some steps. So straight away you can see that this is not huge in the detail. It's very basic. It has actually got a reasonable amount of weight to it. It's by no means what I would call a Hornby A4 Tender. So speaking of which, I'm going to bring in an old, and it is an old, Hornby A4 Tender. This particular loco from Silverlink is actually featured before in one of our videos as it was a complete repair job. So if we have a look at the top, you can see the massive detail differences. You can see the corridor on the Hornby A4 Tender. You can see the hatch for where the water would go through. You can also see where the water scoop area comes up at the top. If we get to the corridors, you can see obviously there's a huge amount more detail on the actual end of the Tender with steps, handrails, lamp irons, and the corridor looks somewhat more realistic on that. The buffers aren't hugely different in size, although they are definitely bigger on this particular one for the Backman. The coal loads are completely different. You can see where there's similarities, just vaguely, as in like sort of artistic license. And then of course when we look inside, completely different, even more detail on the Hornby one. There is also quite a significant size difference. So if I bring the front of both Tenders up, there's probably about a 1 centimeter difference in size between the two Tenders. Then again, this is technically classed as HO, so I'm not going to split hairs on that too much, but when you actually put them together side by side in height, our HO one is significantly taller. The wheel set on here has actually got really fine flanges and will negotiate quite complicated point work, as I've found out in the time that we've had this. There's a little mark on the Tender here, but that's actually off the packaging. It is exactly where 2 of the handle points are for handling the packaging, and it's left a little bit of a scar on the Tender there, not present on the other side because, well, there isn't one of those on the packaging on the opposite side. There's the Tender. Let's move to the loco. I'm going to start underneath. We have got our front bogie there. It has got a mid-sized D-shaped tension hook coupling. It pivots and swivels quite well, reasonably well. We haven't had any problems with derailments with that. The wheel set flanges are actually really quite fine. We haven't had any derailments with that either, and it does actually run really quite smooth. Rear pony truck is very similar to that of the old Hornby one, where it just swivels from side to side. If I just bring the old Hornby one in there, you can see pretty much same sort of layout as to how that works. We've got a very basic hook and eye sort of coupling here for going between the Tender and the locomotive. You can see there, that's all it is. It's just plastic. Could break quite easily, I suppose, but we are quite careful with these things. It has got a spring fitted to it, so it will give it a little bit of leeway up and down, left and right, all that sort of thing. If I bring it round to the side here, you can see that we have got our valve gear, we've got our cylinders, we've got our motion, all of that. Now, I've tried not to handle it because I don't really know what kind of metal that they're made from. There's a certain amount of a shine to it, but they certainly aren't detailed in the way that locomotives, say from Hornby and so are, where we have got our fluted connecting rods and things like that. They are just basic, they are just flat, but they do the job. They are there, so you don't quite have that level of detail when it comes to our motion and gearing. As I said before, pretty much everything is just moulded, so all of the handrails are moulded and they're just painted. Same with our Spencer nameplate at the top there. I believe the whistle here at the front is separately fitted. I don't know how you would be able to mould that into that position. And I believe that the two lamp irons here are actually separately fitted. Looking underneath, you can just see them poking out from underneath there, but they're not even straight. It is very much of CGI. There is pretty much nothing in the way of detail inside that cab. Now, I have seen some people do some pretty wicked work removing the cab area from a Hornby A4 that's been for scrap and placing it in just to sort of give that interpretation of there being an interior. But to be fair, if you were going to put a driver and fireman in, you're not going to see an awful lot anyway. At the front, we have got the ridiculously large coupling hook imitation, and at the front here we've got good old Spencer's face with his moving eyes. Now, if I bring this old Hornby model in, you might be able to notice the difference in width. The width difference on the smoke box is considerable, hugely considerable. Spencer is somewhat slimmer than that of the Hornby A4. Obviously, like I said, this is an older A4, but there isn't that much different from the current ones in size. There are hugely significant differences between that of a A4 and this Bachmann Spencer. On the opposite side, it is pretty much exactly the same as that we've just looked at. There is quite a significant amount of weight to this model. I will give it that. There is quite a significant amount of weight. This particular model is not DCC ready. It is a US import, and as I said, it's about 10 years of age now. The DCC readying sort of side of things seems to have been introduced as Backman have took over the European market with the Thomas & Friends models, making them more ready for those using DCC. Some of the big problems I have got from a adult perspective is you've got to know that this is definitely of the CGI era. On the A4 from Hornby, we've got that nice sloped front that you get with the A4s in real life. On the Backman one, it's almost completely horizontal. There is a very slight curve where his face is. The lining doesn't match up with that of the A4s in the silver jubilee colours and things like that. It's, from a purist view, it's just not right, and it is definitely of the CGI era. So I'm not tearing holes in it because it is a good model, it is a good runner, and it runs very smoothly. It's got some nice fine, almost fine scale wheels to it. Why did we buy the Backman version over the Hornby version? Well, there's some simple answers to that. One is we weren't collecting the likes of Spencer and Murdoch when Hornby were producing them. As everyone's fully aware at this time, 2021, Hornby do not produce any Thomas & Friends scale models anymore. Picking up a second-hand Spencer these days in good condition can potentially knock you back up to 4 figures. More recently, when I've been looking on the internet, not just on auction websites but in reputable shops, they've been reaching £800 or more. I have seen a few of these where they have been available for, say, between £150 and £200, where they've had significant damage, buffers missing, buffer rails missing, various parts in relation to the Hornby model. I had been tempted to purchase them and I had been tempted to repair them, but then there was just a part of me that just decided no, we'd already gone down this road. As a means to an end, we chose to get the Backman one purely because when I purchased the Backman one for Aidan, it only came in at about £75 to £85. Now, I do believe they are at the £100 or just teetering over the £100 price tag now for the Bachmann Spencer. If you want an alternative that's reasonably close, this is what I would call an alternative. It's in some respects it's definitely a budget alternative compared to buying a second-hand Hornby one. You could always go down the road of buying an older A4 from Hornby like this, and you could potentially go onto the Shapeways website and you could fit the face, you could fit a nameplate on, you could do some work. I also looked at potentially doing that, but then I figured, what's the point? There's no real need. Backman have made their interpretation of Spencer, and it is almost definitely that of the CGI era. That is the Bachmann Spencer. Don't forget, let me know what you think of the Backman interpretation of Spencer. Have you got one? What do you think of it? Do you wish Backman had made it in the actual model form, or are you happy with the CGI version? Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget, if you haven't already subscribed, click on the round button. If you enjoyed this video and you want to watch some more, there's another video at the top of the screen and there's a playlist at the bottom. See you again soon.